All right, y'all. Check it out. We got Coach Dean Thomas from American Top Team. You know, American Top Team is on the headliner this weekend. Coach Dean's staying back though because he's got somebody fighting up in Bellator. Jordan Young is fighting who?
Julius Anglicus.
Okay, I remember him. He was on. He was on this last season of Contender Series, as a matter of fact.
Yes. So here's the kicker: is he beat my nephew
Oh,
on
is
the
that
Contender
correct?
Series.
I did not know.
Carl Reed is my nephew.
I did not know that. I did not know that was
Yeah,
your nephew. Yeah, I definitely covered all of those fights, man. It was a lot of fun. You got. I actually saw T Wood at one of them, at the
yeah,
first one.
yeah.
You got to make it
Right.
out for one of those, though.
Yeah, I've never been to one of them.
Well, and you know now they got that new facility, the UFC Apex. It's right next to the PI, and it's phenomenal.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, man. Yeah,
yeah.
we.
I remember they were talking about building that, and they were talking about how good it was going to be.
Yeah.
So you are vouching for it. Perfect.
Oh yeah. So the first night of season three Contender Series, they actually, during the daytime, they brought all the like local media. They let us come over there, and we did a tour with Uncle Dana, with your boy. He actually gave us a tour of the whole place, and it was awesome, man. It was really cool to experience, and yeah, man, that venue. I think probably I think probably next season, man, you'll have somebody on there for sure, because they're always scouting talent. I mean, it's 5 fights, so that's 10 fighters per for 10 weeks, and that's 100 guys, man. So, and
Yeah,
any of your guys who are represented by Jason House, if you have anybody, especially, he gets a lot of cats on there. So,
yeah. It's a good platform too, man. Whether you win or lose, it's a good experience. I mean, hopefully, obviously, the goal is to win and get a contract, but um, it's still a good experience regardless.
oh yeah, yeah, those
Get
guys. I
on
mean,
there.
they move on to something always.
Yeah.
All right. So anyway, the reason that we bring you Coach Dean Thomas, one of the greatest minds in the sport of MMA, and of course, he's a UFC veteran, longtime coach, well known, well reputed, of course, award winning at the American Top Team. So he's the mind, and I'm the body. So between the mind, body, and soul, we got y'all covered. We got y'all covered. UFC 244. Before we get into that, though, I do want to make just one quick statement. There's a really tragic situation happening with Walt Harris right now. Currently, his daughter is missing. She's a college student, young girl. It's a very, very, very sad, just a tragic thing because, I mean, on so many levels, no parent wants to experience that. Nobody wants that to happen to their family member, period, but especially as a parent. And the latest thing that I'm reading from USA Today as of yesterday, a little less than 24 hours ago, they said that they suspect foul play. So that's not good. He's pulled out of his upcoming fight, which you know what? If there's any reason to pull out of a fight and your kid is missing, that is the best reason because I know he's probably beside himself. I mean, there's no way his head can be in the right mind space to get ready for a cage fight.
Yeah, I tell you, like, you got kids, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, like, anybody who has kids, like, it's such a nightmare to watch Walt Harris go through this. Like, having kids, just knowing, like, how you would feel, because you can relate to that. Like, you could put yourself in his shoes, and I just feel terrible, man. Like, I don't even know what to say. Like, I feel really bad for him for the situation, and like the fact that he's pulling out of his fight, you're almost kind of like you wouldn't even expect him to take the fight based on this. You know what I mean? It's
Oh
like,
yeah.
oh, it's like the worst thing possible to have a kid missing.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, our prayers and thoughts are with Walt. He's a great dude too, and not that makes any difference in this situation, but just for what it's worth, when I went out to San Antonio to cover the UFC fight out there in July, he actually dropped into the practice room at my old gym on Thursday night sparring and was getting a little work in. And I got to meet him there, and I met him during the media day because he fought on that card. And he's just a really great, just a humble dude. Comes from an NCAA football background. Just a raw athlete, great talent in the UFC. And man, I really hope for the best. I really hope for the best because this is terrible. You know.
Yeah, I know Walt a lot. I used to work with Walt. I trained Walt for a couple of his fights, and and I remember when I first met him back when he was still living in Alabama, training with guys, and he fought oh, I can't remember the guy's name he fought, but it was a small show in Orlando, and I was like, man, he's so talented. He lost the fight, but he's so talented. And I was like, dude, you got to stay with this, and because I think he wanted to retire because he lost that fight. It was just Chris Barnett, Beast Boy Chris Barnett. And
Name sounds familiar.
well, he beat Walt, and I said, man, you got to stay with this, and he did. And Walt really made the best out of his career. I've trained him for a few of his fights when he was at Top Team, but now I think he's really hit his stride, and it's just unfortunate that something like this would happen because he really hit his stride as a fighter. But you know what? At the end of the day, there are more important things than fighting, and that's family and having kids and just, being a good human being. But, for a good human being like this to be going through that, man, my heart goes out to him. And like you said, prayers and everything to Walt Harris.
Man. I'll be keeping it, up to date on that story and see how that develops. And like I said, man, we wish nothing but the best there for real. That's terrible. Now, on to we're going to do a quick breakdown of UFC 244, just the main card, because this card is just too much to get into, man. I mean, really, I think we're looking forward to just enjoying the festivities because it's such a treat when we get these Madison Square Garden fights, and what a headliner, man. So listen, George Masvidal is a guy you know very well. He's out of American Top Team, of course. And then you've got Nate Diaz, who is a guy who just for some reason I can never count out no matter who he's fighting, ever. I remember when the first time he fought Conor McGregor, everybody was on that Conor McGregor Kool-Aid. And I said, you know what? I said, this guy's a bad matchup for Conor McGregor in many ways. And turns out I was right. And then, of course, everybody afterwards is like, yeah, see, I knew it. Okay. I'm the only one that said it. Let the record reflect.
But you got to realize, too, man, is it kind of the reason why he got the fight? Was because they thought it was going to be an easy fight for Conor, I believe,
maybe. Yeah, for
that's
sure.
What I thought. For sure.
Yeah.
That's why you can never count Nate out, man. You can never count him out, even though I'm kind of counting him out in this one, but I can't, I wish I could, but I can't because he's uncount-outable.
I mean, who's hotter than George Masvidal, right? I mean, Jesus Christ. And it's like, I'm telling you, I wouldn't bet on this one with your money. I can't bear to go into the casino and put any of my hard-earned money on the line because, like you said, I'm going back and forth all the time. I'm like, man, Masvidal's got this. He has to. I mean, if you look at, I'll tell you this. Nate Diaz came back from that really long layoff. I mean, it was like maybe 3 years. He was gone, right? He goes back in there, fights Pettis, right? Now, people could say what they want about Pettis. They've been saying for the longest time he's washed up. That's not the case. You look at Pettis' his record. I mean, the dude, he's fought literally nothing but top contenders and former champions, kind of like a Chris Weidman. And, of course, Chris Weidman's taken a lot more damage, I think, but that's a whole other deal. But the fact that Nate could be out for so long, come in there and fight a guy who, listen, Pettis is not the level of jiu-jitsu of Nate Diaz, but he submitted black belts. I mean, he can hang with a black belt. He can finish him. And he's one of the best strikers. And so what a clash of styles you have there. Two guys who love to just get down and strike and get into a scrap. And Nate Diaz comes out with the win. I mean, you really cannot count this dude out for nothing. But, Dean, like I said, Jorge Masvidal better than me, better than the listeners. What are his keys to victory? What does he have to do to get in there and get this win?
Well, one thing you got to know about Diaz, right? Like, if you watch all his fights, he doesn't change much. Diaz fights the same type of fight all the time. And the guys that have had success against him were guys who were extremely well-rounded and were able to take pressure, and they were solid enough to be able to wrestle Diaz for long enough to where, one, he couldn't get a submission, and two, just bring him back to that starting point back on his feet. And George Masvidal is very well capable of doing all those things. He's very well-rounded. Like, if you've ever watched him just box, he's extremely good at that. And I would put money on it that he's a better pure boxer than Nate Diaz. So he can box. He can also kick. And then in the last 5 years or so, he's really spent a lot of time in college wrestling rooms working on his ability to grind and wrestle. So with all those things coupled, I mean, he could really make this fight look very similar to when Nate Diaz fought Rory McDonald or when Nate Diaz fought Josh Thompson. Nate didn't do well against those guys just because, one, they were able to withstand the pressure, and two, just being too much for him in all those different areas. So here's where he could have a problem, though. If George Masvidal doesn't move his feet well or starts moving backwards and gets pushed up against the fence, the same thing that happened with Pettis. Pettis just broke, man. Pettis wasn't able to withstand the pressure. But I think George Masvidal is a bit more of a dog than Pettis. He's stronger than Pettis. He hits harder than Pettis with his hands, rather, just with his hands. But he's got to get going. He can't get bullied around. He can't get pushed backwards, and he's got to be able to move his feet and be slick.
Yeah, and what I'm looking at, Coach, is that George has also been way more active, and I say that because I just was heaping praise on Nate Diaz for coming back after a long layoff and looking really good in there, but that still doesn't compare, in my opinion, to a guy like Masvidal who's coming out and starching Darren Till and Ben Askren, and just has really looked phenomenal. Now, I'm glad you said something about his boxing, because there are a lot of people that believe that he is. And we've talked about this before. I think we talked about it before the McGregor-Mayweather boxing fight. George Masvidal is one of the, if not the best, definitely top 3 in the UFC as far as pure boxers. I think
no doubt about it.
I think he could go into pro boxing and make. He could have done that as a career.
Yeah. So, like, if 10 years ago he didn't want to do mixed martial arts, he wanted to go into pro boxing, he'd have been a star in boxing. He just chose this path of going to MMA. But he can box, man. He's got great head movement, great footwork, fast hands. I mean, he can legitimately box and hang with the best of them. And like I said, I think he boxes better than Nate. Nate's a volume puncher. He puts a lot of pressure on you, and then he sneaks in a couple hard shots here and there to keep you honest. But in terms of like pure boxing, Nate doesn't have the pedigree that Masvidal has. Doesn't mean Nate can't catch him and hurt him. It just means that in terms of pure boxing, Masvidal's a better pure boxer.
And that volume is what makes Nate and Nick Diaz so good. They are so good at that volume, and their range is so good, and they're extremely durable. But I feel like, and I could be wrong, but I feel like Jorge Masvidal is not the type of guy who is going to get frustrated like most people do. If you think about the time Nate Diaz put on a clinic against Michael Johnson, which is not an easy guy to beat up on, and he did that. He did that against Michael Johnson, and it was with volume. Now, the other thing is, and I agree with your assessment that he's not on the same level as far as pure boxing as Jorge. But, it drives me crazy because a lot of people say that, especially Joe Rogan. He loves to say, oh, Diaz, he's such a good boxer. Actually, he's an effective boxer. He's not a good boxer at all. Like, his fundamentals are terrible. He keeps his hands down all the time. He does use range well. He uses range incredibly well. But I think if he was in a pure boxing fight, I don't think he's a great boxer. I think he's just effective because he knows how to play to his strengths, and he's really good. He's good at movement. He's good at volume.
Yeah, and it's an interesting point you brought up about the Michael Johnson fight with Nate Diaz. I think prior to that, like, Michael Johnson right now is more of a dog in terms of, like, he fights with more heart. And I think he fights with a lot of heart because of that fight. Because he realized that he was outgunned and couldn't deal with the pressure, and he kind of broke a little bit. I think that changed the way he fights, and now he fights with more of his heart. But prior to that fight, Nate Diaz put so much pressure on him and broke him down that he changed the way Michael Johnson fights now. But you're right. Masvidal won't break like that. Masvidal is, this is a guy who came up fighting in Kimbo Slice's backyard. Like, fighting is something that he likes to do. I think he loves when people put pressure on him. He loves being engaged in a dogfight. When he was training for Ben Askren, he was in weeks before doing the grind that everybody else was doing when he didn't have to, just because he loves that grind. He loves pressure. I don't see Nate being able to put enough pressure on him. to get him to make a mistake. Even though that's what Nate does best though. Nate puts pressure on people and forces with that volume and forces you to get tired. And once you get tired, you do what? You take a bad shot and he submits you. So, but I don't see George falling for that though. I can't see it happening.
Yeah. Well, and who knows? Maybe we'll get in there and see a quick finish. For some reason, when he fought Darren Till, and again, I'm not saying this in hindsight. My official prediction before that fight, I was like, I don't know. For some reason, I feel like Masvidal is just going to knock him out because he just looks so good, man, in every way. Like his fight IQ is off the charts, man. And he's always had a good fight IQ, but he's even better. He's getting better as he goes. So my money is already in the bank. Already ordered that pay-per-view. I will be front and center for that one tomorrow night. Cannot wait. All right. Speaking of Till is going to jump up to 185 and take on Kelvin Gastelum. I don't know if I like this because for Darren Till, because I feel like in a way you're kind of setting him up for the Cody Garbrandt treatment in that he was this undefeated sort of stud. You know, he was unstoppable. He was the guy. He was the guy that was going to beat the guy. And your boy, Tyron Woodley, of course, put him away. Then your other boy, who we were just talking about, George Masvidal, put him away in a very, very violent fashion in front of his hometown. Now you got a guy stepping up a weight class, and you're throwing him right to the wolves. You're throwing him against a former title challenger in Kelvin Gastelum. And I think Kelvin Gastelum has every bit of what it takes to beat a guy like Darren Till because he's, quite frankly, he's more well-rounded. And he's a guy who's extremely durable. He's not the kind of guy that's, Darren Till's the kind of guy that'll knock you out quick, but that doesn't happen to Kelvin Gastelum.
Yeah, I mean, you hit it right on the head when you said durable. There's not a better word to describe Kelvin Gastelum than durable. If you were to put like all of his better attributes on paper, durability would be at the top of it. And I agree with you, man. I do not think this is a good fight for Darren Till at his first fight at 185. When you saw the success that he had at 170, one of it was because he was just bigger than all the other guys. So he was able to get away with a lot of mistakes that these other guys were making. Like, when he fought Jess Senayari and, Wendell Oliveira, like these guys just weren't good enough to capitalize on the mistakes that he were making. So, and not that Darren Till was a bad fighter. He just made mistakes he was able to get away with because he was just bigger, longer, and he's a tough guy. He's a good fighter. But when he fought Tyron's a big puncher. He couldn't take that punch. He couldn't. Like, Tyron hit him with that shot. He fell and then ultimately got submitted. Fought George Masvidal. He was doing well, but when George clocked him, he clocked him with a left hand. George ain't even southpaw. It was a big punch, though. Don't get me wrong. Mm-hmm. But put him out. So it just shows that he has holes in one, his defense, and in his whole fight game, he's got holes. And to move up in weight, which is going to help him that he's not cutting as much weight, but now he's fighting another big puncher that's durable. And Darren Till hasn't shown a lot of versatility in his game to say, all right, I can take this guy down, or I can do this, I can do that. And he likes to stand and trade, and I don't think that's going to be good for him against a guy like Kelvin Gastelum.
Yeah, I agree 100%. All right, so we're halfway through the main card here. Stephen Thompson is a guy you know very well. You had to prepare your prodigy, Tyron Woodley, to defend against this man not once, but twice. And, of course, those fights were extremely close. The second one was pretty uneventful. However, we did see him get dropped in both of those fights. And in his last outing, of course, Pettis did the unthinkable and was losing the entire first round until he just put Wonder Boy's lights out completely. Now you got him against a huge power puncher in Vicente Luque, who, he's got 6 losses, doesn't have the greatest record, but that, I always say, records don't win fights. And on paper, this one, it looks like a risky one for Steven, and I don't know one way or the other, but I feel like this is going to really tell us a lot about whether or not Thompson will ever make it back to title contention. And I'm leaning towards probably not.
Yeah, and I think you are smart for saying that. I don't like this fight for Stephen Thompson. I think the biggest puzzle with Stephen Thompson has been solved. Tyron solved it. It took him a minute. He did better the second time in solving that riddle. And then I think now watching it, everybody's going, oh, that's how we do it. But prior to Tyron fighting him, there's nobody else in the division that fights like that. So not a lot of people had, the resources to train for that. And they didn't. But now that I think that Wonder Boy's been figured out, I think that, Luque's in his camp are probably, figuring out how to deal with it. And let's be real too. Wonder Boy's not a young guy. If this was 2 years ago, I'd go, man, it's an easy fight for Stephen Thompson. He's just going to pick him apart. He's great. But I think 2 years removed, one, everybody's figured that style out. And two, Stephen Thompson's, just older now, and he's been banged up a little bit. He's got some wear and tear on his body. And I just don't see him doing well. I mean, maybe he'll prove me wrong, but I don't see him doing well against a well-rounded and durable guy like Vincent Luque. Vincent Luque will take them shots coming in and deliver his own. And if he lands, it could spell disaster for Stephen Thompson.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, because we've seen this with other, karate-based guys like Machida. Once they crack that code, once they figure him out, it happened to MVP. It was only the one loss, but my point is, with those guys who are very tricky and elusive, it's just a matter of time. Once they get figured out and people crack that code, then it's the gig's up. Like, they're no longer this mystery, this enigma, like that you don't know how to approach them and how to fight them. People now have the blueprint, because they see a guy like Tyron Woodley, who's an extremely well-rounded, skilled fighter and an amazing wrestler and power puncher, knockout artist, go in there for 10 rounds with this kid and still not be able to put him away. And then, it was a learning process. People started to see, okay, this is where Wonder Boy's vulnerable, and so on and so forth. And people started to capitalize on it.
Yeah. And also too, you also got to understand too that, Vincent Luque, I'm not sure who he's worked with. I mean, if he worked with Henry Hooft for this fight, those guys have been dealing with like the karate style they grew up dealing with that style. And that was one of the reasons why Pettis had success with Stephen Thompson, training with Duke. Like, Duke helped Tyron get prepared for it, and it wasn't natural for Tyron. So it took us it took him a whole entire fight to get used to it. But Pettis has been doing it his whole life. Duke Rufus has been doing it his whole life. And Luque's a natural striker. And I know if he's working with Henry Hooft is used to dealing with karate style guys. So I just think, like you said, just cracking that code is going to be a lot easier for them. And like I said before, let's keep it real. Wonder Boy is not Wonder Boy no more. He's an old man now. The old man,
Yeah, he's my age, so I can tell you, I promise you, he's not a young man. Look, hey, folks, thanks for tuning in. In case you wondered why we brought Dean Thompson on, I told y'all at the top of the show, but you just got your money's worth right there. I mean, where are you going to find these kind of breakdowns like this, man? I appreciate it, Coach. So, look, we got two more here to go. We got Derrick Lewis, the Black Beast, representing H-Town, and I'm a Texas boy all the way, but I also got a special shout out to his opponent, Blagoy Ivanov, who's a guy who's training with us over at Extreme. I got to be honest, the first time that I saw him in the practice room, I thought it was Shogun Hua, and I was like, God damn, Shogun gets fat as fuck when he's out of camp.
They do look alike.
He does. He looks just like him. You see him in person, it's like, oh shit, I was staring at him, man. He was staring at me back. I was like, oh shit, I probably should stop staring at this big son of a bitch. But no, in all seriousness, no, he only has 2 losses. So they have him as a favorite on the Vegas odds. I haven't checked them lately, so the line might have moved, but I just don't. If that's still the case, I don't know if I agree with that. Yes, he only has 2 losses, got 18 wins. That's great. However, I don't know that he didn't look that great in his last fight. I don't know that he's ever fought somebody as the caliber of Derrick Lewis, and you cannot let, Derrick Lewis has 7 losses, but I mean, these are against guys like DC. These are against, really good guys. So I don't know, man. How do you break that one down?
This was one of the harder fights on the card for me to pick. And here's why. There's such a small sample size in fights, man, and you just don't know how they're going to react towards the moment in the situation. Now, I think Blagoy is a better fighter than Derrick Lewis. I think he's, better disciplined on the feet, better on the ground, just better overall fighter. but I think Derrick Lewis wins the fight. I think Derrick Lewis finds a way to gut it out. He's going to have a trick up his sleeve, play possum, act like he's hurt, and then hit him with a bit. I don't know. I just think Derrick Lewis is going to win, but I think he's the lesser fighter of the two.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, and sometimes it's not. Yeah, it doesn't even matter. You could have the best skills in every area, but it's a fight. A fight's a fight, and the Black Beast is a national treasure. I hope he wins just so we can hear him on the mic afterwards and see what he has to say. All right, so last but not least, on the main card, of course, and this is the last one we'll talk about, is another boy from Extreme Couture here, and he might have camped elsewhere though, because I think he actually was talking about moving to TriStar. Though I've seen him around, I've seen him in the gym, in and out, and that's Kelvin Lee. Kelvin Lee is one of my favorite human beings in all of MMA and the UFC. But he's, for most people, I think he's one of the most hated, just because of his arrogance and his trash talk. But believe me, Kelvin is actually a really, really good dude. Him and his brother Keith. Taking on Gregor Gillespie. Now, Gregor Gillespie is a guy who's 13-0. He's an absolute wrecking ball, and he is one of the best damn grapplers I've ever seen in MMA. I'll tell you what, this right here, to me, I'm not calling Kelvin Lee a gatekeeper, because I don't think that's what he is. He's a top guy. He fought for an interim title against Tony Ferguson. He's fought some of the best. He still is one of the best. But this is a major. This is a proving ground for Gregor Gillespie. If he can get past, especially impressively, against Kelvin Lee, now we're talking about a guy who's a top contender. A lot of people have been wondering if that's the case. What are your thoughts, Coach?
Man, I don't like this fight for Kelvin Lee. Not because I don't think Kelvin Lee is talented enough. I do feel like he's talented enough for this fight. I just don't think he's in the right space in terms of where his head is at, and in terms of where his career is at, as far in mentally. And you said it earlier, and I don't even think you realize what you said, but you said he is in Extreme Couture, he's at TriStar, and that's not good for a fighter to be fighting a guy like Gregor Gillespie, because every second, every moment's going to count. And what's going to happen is, in those moments during the fight where Kelvin Lee wants to do something, he's going to have some hesitation and some confusions because of where he's at in terms of what he's doing in training, I think. And that's why, like, when you get with a camp, it takes a little bit of adjustment. It takes a little bit of an adjustment before you can really dig into what they're trying to show you, and it becomes like instinct for you. So, like, right now, I almost feel like Kelvin Lee's instincts aren't going to be there, because he's lost his last couple of fights, or didn't have a lot of great performance in his last couple of fights. He switched camps. He doesn't really know where he's at in terms of fighting. He wants to fight at different weight classes. There's a lot of confusion going on in his mind, and that just causes hesitation in fights and not getting what you want out of fights. And I don't think Gregor Gillespie is the guy you want to fight when that's happening, because Gregor knows exactly what he wants. He's on a tear, and I believe he has what it takes to fight for a championship one day himself.
Yeah, no, I mean, you said it perfectly there, Coach. The guy, yeah, with Kevin, there's so much going on in his headspace that you don't know. Like I said, bouncing back and forth. I mean, he literally jumped up to welterweight for one fight, lost, and now he's coming back down. And we know he's had trouble making that weight at 155. And of course, he made it today. But I mean, still, how hard did he have to struggle? And then, everybody was extremely devastated by the loss of Robert Follis, just a couple of years ago, especially Kevin. That was a guy that was extremely close with Follis. That was a huge part of his success, was having that coach and having that dynamic with him. And that's just Robert Follis was just a human being that you can't replace. I mean, I don't know what to say. So I feel bad for the guy. He was once sort of in the position of Gregor Gillespie at one point. He was the guy that was kind of like on the come up, and like he was steamrolling people. So
yeah, you're right about that, man. It's where, and you got to give Robert Follis his props, man. Like, he's a guy that he not a lot of people knew about him, but he's been around for a long time, and in the coaching community, we all loved him. He was a great coach, man. He was one of us, so And I could imagine how his athletes were devastated and impacted by that loss. And that maybe that had a lot to do with Kevin just like kind of losing a bit of himself, losing his coach like that. But hopefully he finds it. But I don't see him finding it this weekend against Greg Gillespie. I can't see it.
Well, as always, Dean Thomas, Coach Dean Thomas from American Top Team, coach to the stars, to the champs. He's got all kinds of championship resumes under his belt, fought in the UFC, and he's on that TV show with your boy Matt Serra and Uncle Dana on Dana White's Looking for a Fight. Those guys are always up to a ton of shenanigans, having a lot of fun. Dean is, he's a man after my own heart, a Renaissance man. He does it all: acting, stand-up comedy. Maybe we can even get you into the music game, and you can. You can be a rock star like me one day.
No.
Hey, but in all seriousness, no, man, we really appreciate your time because these breakdowns are phenomenal. I love talking fights with you. And, man, I'm looking forward to this card probably more than I have any other event this year. For my money, I think UFC Tampa was the best card that we've seen all year. It's one of the best I've ever seen in my entire life. This one, just for the star power, has the potential to be certainly one of the best of this year. And I'm Rodney James for Cage Side Press. He's Coach D. Thomas. Coach, you got anything you want to say before we get out of here?
Man, I love y'all, man. Thanks for having me on and letting me speak, man. I hope you guys pay attention and it works out for you.
Yeah, appreciate it, man. And as always, thanks a lot. Have a good weekend, Coach.
All right, man. Take it easy.
All right, we'll see you, man.